Our final guest for the evening is Dr. Leslie Cannold. The good doctor is a medical ethicist. She's an educator, an author of non-fiction and fiction works, and that includes the historical novel, The Book of Rachel. She's a member of the Mental Health Tribunal, currently on the Victorian Board of Nurses and Midwifery, the Forensic Leave Panel. She's done it all, Zuleyha, and she also chairs the Ethics Committee for Mary Stopes International, which provides sexual and reproductive health care to many disadvantaged women in 37 countries right around the world. And our guest also sits on the advisory board of the AIS and is the deputy chair of the Board of Mental Health Victoria, someone who understands exactly what's going on in this COVID-19 world of ours. Welcome, Dr. Cannold.
Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. Zuleyha and I have been waiting for this opportunity. And I think it's important, as someone who's so well informed and interested in ethics, in particular the values of privacy, trust, and liberty. We have a topical question for you, Doctor. And I think it's the one that will start the conversation. Now, those values that I spoke of just a moment ago come together in a current discussion which is taking place right around not only this country, but many other countries around the world. And it's to do with the use of contact tracing apps that we can download onto our smartphones. Now, we're told they will allow us to return to a more normal existence and prevent a potentially more deadly second wave of infections. I want to know what your thoughts are about the apps, and are they a good idea?
Okay, well, it's a great question. I think the most important thing for people to understand in order to make their own view about whether contact tracing apps are something that they want to download on their phone, because it is something that each one of us individually is being asked to make a decision about. Now, where it stands at the moment is that I haven't downloaded the Australian app yet, and I say the word yet on purpose, because I may still do it. But right now, there's a few things that haven't happened that I would like to see happen first. But in order to kind of make sense of that, you have to go back to just contact tracing without an app. So contact tracing is an age-old public health intervention. And it's basically, in this virus, one of the basic things that we have to try and keep ourselves safe. So forget about the app, just set the app aside for a minute. The way that it works is, in the past, tuberculosis, AIDS, all kinds of communicable diseases, we have had to find people who are ill. They usually come to hospital, they show up. We have to sit down with them, we have to do this extensive interview, find out who they've been in contact with, get in touch with every single one of those people, and depending on the disease, so for a COVID-like disease, people may not have symptoms, they may never get symptoms, or they may be pre-symptomatic. But we have to ask them to quarantine themselves, not to go out. We have to then find out who they've been in contact with, and so on, until you can basically contain the disease. So that's how it works. And as you can hear from that, and I don't think people recognize this, it's extremely intrusive. It means that what happens is, if you go to your doctor, unlike a normal situation, you get diagnosed with a cold or a cancer, nobody gets notified. If you get diagnosed with a communicable disease, a health authority does get notified. They know that you have that disease. And that means they come knocking on your door or calling you on the phone, asking you and telling you what it is you're going to have to do to keep the community safe, asking you about your contacts, which is a very privacy invading kind of intervention. We've never given that a second thought. We understand sometimes that kind of thing has to happen. And why does it have to happen? Because sometimes our individual privacy and our liberty, which is what's impeded when they tell us we can't go out, sometimes those things are less important than keeping the rest of the community safe. So that's the background, and interestingly, not controversial. Nobody's ever raised a fuss about it, and nobody's raised concerns about the fact that we have laws that give our public health officials some pretty extensive powers when it comes to this kind of thing. So when it comes to diseases that can impact us seriously, they can step in, they can ask us, but ultimately they can tell us what we have to do to keep ourselves, but also other people safe. Now
So
into
why
the
haven't you
contact.
downloaded?
That's right. It's a good
Okay.
question. So now enter the contact tracing app. So all the contact tracing app is an adjunct. It's something in addition to what we would normally have. Because if you think about it, with this disease, you could have been actually in contact with the person who might have infected you, and you might be infected a couple of weeks ago. Now, while we're social isolating, it's probably not that hard to think about who we've been in contact with. But when you're running a normal life, and that's what they're promising us, that we're going to get back to, getting on a bus, going to a supermarket, you don't know who you've actually been connected to. Movie theaters, think about all of these things. They're people you could be in contact with for over half an hour, which is the risk factor for this condition, but you don't know their name. And so what a contact tracing app allows is that, in the Australian context, and I'm just going to talk about the Australian app, it allows, if I've got it on my phone and the person next to me has got it on their phone and we're sitting together, say in a movie theater, it allows our phones to exchange information so that when I am diagnosed with COVID, say, and I agree to hand over my information, the government can see very accurately who I have been in contact with insofar as those people have the contact app. So as you can see, it's not going to work on its own. It's just going to help as an additional thing. So why haven't I downloaded it? Because it sounds so great. And it does sound great. And if it were the case that I had a lot of trust in our government, I would immediately have downloaded it. So one of the biggest problems that we've got around this app is, for years, people like me have been talking about the running down of public trust. And it's all been horrendously abstract. The running down of public trust, social capital, all of these things sounded very vague. It wasn't really kind of clear what the take home was, what the downstream consequence was. This is a perfect example of where you're reaping what has been sowed around government trust. So has our government handled this COVID outbreak well? Super well. They've done an absolutely great job. But in the past, have they handled our private data well? They have not. So there have been problems with the way the government, and this is both sides, I need to be clear about that they've handled metadata. There's been creep, so something called mission creep, where they've taken our private data for one purpose and then they start using it for another. There's been the release of people's private data around the robo-debt crisis, where all of a sudden people's private information was suddenly released because it suited the government to do that. And there's a number of those instances. So what I'd like to see has not happened yet. What we've been told is the app will do this, the app won't do that, and yet we still don't have legislation. So do I trust that the government is going to legislate in every single way that they said they would? No, I'd like to see it. Do I trust that the computer code is exactly as the government has described it? No, they said they would release it. Haven't done it yet. So when they do those things, it's sort of a trust but verify approach is what I'm taking. When they verify that the things they've said are in place in regard to privacy, I'm going to download that app.
Leslie,
So the contagion has already spread. Is that what you're saying? You're going to wait for the contagion to spread. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I guess what I am saying is that because this is adjunctive and because we have done so well in Australia, that we have such low rates right now, it is entirely possible to do contact tracing without this app. And in fact, in the US, for instance, when you speak to people at Johns Hopkins, who are extremely informed and kind of some of the foremost authorities around managing communicable disease, they say that what we really just need to do is, in this climate where there's so many people out of work, is hire more human contact tracers. Because the reality is there's always going to have to be humans. You can't just get a text that says, oh, by the way, you might have COVID-19, go to the doctor. It's going to need to be more than that. You're going to need to have someone ring you up, explain what the implications are, calm you down, tell you where you can go for the test. If you need to quarantine, provide support for you so that you can actually do that. Maybe even provide an extra place for you to do it if you're living in a house where you can't effectively isolate. So there's always going to need to be humans. I trust that the humans have managed this all right in the past before smartphones, and they still can. But I also hope, I really hope, that we can use technology to help us do this even better. And so if the government delivers for me, George, I'll be downloading the app, and it won't just be me. There'll be other people who have a trust and verify approach who will be downloading it too.
Zuleyha?
Yeah, so I guess I feel like there's a bigger conversation here about privacy and trust. And I feel like this app is just one issue uh, that's part of, as I said, a bigger issue. I mean, I would be inclined to download the app only because I would think, well, I don't really feel like I've got much privacy currently anyway, whether it's because of my mobile phone, because of social media. Well, what's one more app going to do? So what is your thoughts on that kind of thinking?
Well, look, I mean, obviously, if you think the battle has been lost and you're willing to cede the ground, then you're right. And there's certainly no doubt that in a wide variety of contexts, if you're on Facebook or if you even have a phone, which is really a tracking device that lets you make calls, um, we're already potentially sacrificing our privacy. However, corporate surveillance is different to government surveillance. Both of them have their risks and their inconveniences. In this particular context, we're talking about government surveillance. So my background's Jewish. And one of the things that was, the most awful during the Holocaust was that people had given over their information. Every year, 10 years, we do this in the census. We give over our information and we disclose lots of things to the government. And we trust that they will keep and safeguard that information and not give it to somebody who ought not to have it for a use they should not use it for. And yet that is what actually happened. So I still feel like I can name non-good faith laws that have been passed around privacy. I can name violations of laws that we actually have to protect us. But I feel like I still live in a society where there is an idea that privacy should exist, and I'm not ready to give up the battle to have it continue to exist, even though we've had this enormous disruptor of the digital world, which makes it so much easier to violate our privacy and for the things that are taken from us to spread very widely and very quickly, such that we can end up feeling like, oh God, there's just nothing left to save. But I think we can claw that back, because I know that I've watched the growth of my own children and their consciousness around this. So they came into the world at a time right before phones, but they don't really remember a world without computer and phones. And I've watched them go from that kind of naive position of like, who cares? If they want to advertise to me, they can know anything they want about me. I've got nothing to hide, to all of a sudden wanting very much to have privacy. And that was unheard of for children that age. We've actually watched the maturity of those generations realize that privacy matters. And so I think we're all now on the same journey, believing that this new world is great, offers us lots of things, but like every technology, it can be misused and damage us. And the downside of these technologies, and there's a number of them, but one of them is this privacy problem. So I think we're in a clawback mode. I kind of agree with you that we've lost a lot, but I don't think all is lost. I think we can claw some of it back.
There are a number of countries around the world that don't have the same faith in their governments and would be most concerned about these contact tracing apps. One particular society that has taken a fearful hit, especially since 2014, is Turkey. And there have been some atrocities there, some restrictions placed on their society, and it's been confronting from outside, watching those people there persecuted. And I can understand the stance that you've taken. Although it's 70 years since the Holocaust, there is something that's very, very strong that we can't just dismiss. But I'm reminded again that these are extraordinary times. You have never lived in your time through a COVID-19 pandemic, have you?
Absolutely true. These are extraordinary times.
So is
So
this
I
when
take it that your
we?
point, therefore, is, extraordinary times, extraordinary measures. If we were ever going to kind of seed something easily, shouldn't it be now when there's so much
Yes,
concrete benefit? There's so much downside to not doing it, and there's so much concrete benefit for all of us to seed it now. But I guess
exactly, exactly.
I can't really see the either or. So just in terms of like getting really down and dirty with the specifics, we're not going to be changing anything radically in our environment until the 11th. That's when the next time, the government and the state governments meet and are likely to make a significant decision. So what's the hurry? I mean, at the moment, it's not going to be a live or die situation whether I download this thing today or whether I download it after the government does what it said it would do. And to be frank, if they really want me to do it now, they could do their end of the bargain right now. They're in fact kind of, in my view, dragging the chain. And I do think it's extraordinary times, but I think it's important to remember historically that it's always extraordinary times when we introduce things that tend to then never disappear and become permanent fixtures in our social and governmental life. So 9/11 was this extraordinary event in the US
Yes,
landscape. I'm an American born, so I can tell you that, nothing like that had ever been seen before. My family was, in New York at the time. It was really completely devastating. And in the wake of that, a lot of very significant erosions of the civil liberties of Americans were put into place that exist to this day. Because what we know historically is that once you give governments power, it is very, very difficult to get them to give it up. So to me, a couple of weeks that don't actually really matter in a kind of substantial way, insofar as nothing major is going to change in that period of time anyway, is a worthy investment to not put something in place that, if it goes badly, can be misused and maybe something that we actually can't get rid of later.
Zuleyha, there's always the suggestion that the reason why governments don't take back or drop or relinquish these responsibilities or these powers is that the threat is still there. How would you respond to what Leslie just gave us?
Um, I guess it raises a lot of questions. And one thing that I was thinking as you're speaking, Leslie, is, you know your information quite well. The thing is, the decisions that are being made by the layperson is really based on things that they hear from, rumors or, social media. So they're not very intellectual decisions, but they're making decisions that do have implications for themselves and the wider community. So how do you make these kind of big decisions like you are, as in you're holding off, downloading this app, and you've thought about it. You've thought about, its pros and cons. But I don't think the wider society has those sort of decision-making information accessible or available, or they just don't read up on it. So we're all making these decisions without really knowing about its implications. As an ethicist, how do you deal with that?
The problems of democracy, right? I mean, this is an age-old problem. It goes all the way to the debates we have about whether or not you should have to demonstrate certain kind of areas of competency in order to vote, because your vote installs a government. I may have spent, my entire year, the previous year, getting informed about the decision I'm going to make, but I pull the lever just the same as somebody who decides at the absolute last minute that they're going to vote, Labor because they like red better than blue. So, this is just the inherent dilemma, nothing new here. I guess I feel like I think we've had now 2 million Australians who have downloaded this app. They're being a little bit cagey about how many people have to download it for it to be highly effective, although I think that they are correct that any adjunctive capacity that it provides is an improvement on nothing. So for the 2 million
Correct.
people who've downloaded it, even if no more than that download it, when those people are interacting with each other, their Bluetooth will exchange the information, and should one of them get sick, that additional information will be available for them and for everyone else who has the app. So I feel as if the only way that I can wrestle with my concerns about not everybody perhaps making as informed a decision as I would like is that I think what people do is self-select their information channels. Now, sometimes they make some very poor decisions, and I think we already, I think we already know that. We already know that there's a lot of poor decision making being made about what people listen to and how they decide to take that information on. But that's just so much of a bigger issue, like a super important one. Don't get me wrong, it's so important. But it throws us into the disinformation space. It throws us into the whole space around the narrowness and channeling of our conversation. And what's fascinating about this particular event is it's one of the few events that's happening to all of us. I think that is probably of the most interesting social event for us. It's been a medical event. It's been an economic event. It's also been a collective event. And so even though you can fairly say that we're all experiencing the same storm and there's a commonality in that, we're also all in different boats. And usually what people mean when they talk about that is they mean you might have a more, substantial boat and it's, going to protect you a lot better. You have a job, you have a partner, you have a dog, you have older kids, and somebody else might be in a leakier boat. But I also think it's that we also have different capacities to manage the stresses and the strains that this situation is putting on us. There's a lot of mental health strain, which some people are better and worse able to handle. And there's a lot of information strain. And that's your point. There's a lot of difficulty in terms of the mass amount of information that needs to be communicated to people should they truly be making at every juncture informed decisions. And that's not probably possible. But what is possible is for the government to do what it's doing, which I think it's doing a great job of. They have a coronavirus app and they're communicating very clearly on it. They have websites and are communicating very clearly on it. The national broadcaster also communicating extremely clearly. So I think if you expect people, because I think you have no choice but to expect people to funnel their information flows to the kind of amount and quality that they want and can handle, you would hope that what's available, and I think this is true, can inform them to the levels they want. So if you just want to tune into what the government says, for instance, it will tell you to download the app. Simple as that. It will say, download the coronavirus app. It will say, download the contact tracing app. Here's what it's going to do. Here's what it's not going to do. Here's what you worry about. Don't worry about this. Here's how to do it. Keep your phone, put your phone like this, end of story. So I guess all I can say is, I just hope that people tune into what they can handle and what they want to manage, like every other situation we face.
Dr. Leslie Cannold, I'm thrilled to bits that you've got the Bluetooth ready to go, but I also understand very well that you need a couple of things that the government needs to follow through. If those things are done, I'm sure that the next expectation is that you'll do as you've just told us and download the app.
I absolutely will be downloading the app. So we'll all be kind of hanging out, waiting for the vote to happen and for the code to be released. And everyone will be saying, hallelujah, Leslie's downloaded the app.
And you know what? It'll be because Leslie encouraged them to take the next step. Right. So, Leslie, we're so thrilled that once again you've made yourself available. Thank you very, very much for taking us through a journey and helping us to understand the complexities of this thing called privacy, this thing called trust, and this thing that calls us at a special time. We're in this together. We're a unique community under enormous load, and with everybody pulling their weight, I'm sure we'll make it through to the other end. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks to both of you, and Ramadan Mubarak.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leslie.
See ya.